Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the War Report. Now, this is going to be a bit of a classic style one. I am on my 14-year-old laptop. This thing is about half my age. And I am not in my normal sardine can that I've been recording out of for the past couple months here. I'm in a bigger sardine can with lower quality equipment. But I am going to be not here for the next couple of weeks. I'm going on one of my vacations, which, as we know from my previous vacations, nothing ever happens in my absence. And that we definitely will not need Geo on to catch up on everything that we missed in my
Oh yeah.
absence because it will be that uneventful. And we have a moderate amount of news today, so I figured we could probably give you guys an hour and a half, 2 hour show just on everything we have on the docket. But I did want to say first, just to get the rest of the housekeeping items out of the way, this is not directly related to the show, but I do have to say it because I noticed it this week, and I know that I probably scraped a significant number of my audience from him. Argent, RIP to his channel. It's gone. Erased from YouTube. Completely arbitrarily. So it could happen to any of us. It happened to him. He was the one who drew the short straw this time. It could happen to me. And I will say, number one, look for him on alternative platforms, considering the fact he just got completely wiped. I know that he's on
I
Rumble.
I cannot believe it. This is horrible.
Yeah, he's on Rumble, BitChute, I think
Okay,
Odyssey, and a
good.
couple other ones. So, from what I've
I think I
seen,
follow him on Rumble.
well, Rumble is the best alternative platform. But
It is, yeah.
from what I have seen, he does intend to continue. But once again, one of many who have suffered this fate that we may one day suffer as well. And secondarily, I'll use the opportunity to say that I am on those platforms as well. So if anything were to happen to this, you guys can find me over there. But I would recommend anyone that you regularly follow, don't put all your eggs in one basket and try to follow them as many places as you can because, as we saw with our good friend, who, like I said, I'm sure I've scraped many of my audience from, him to me. In which case, like I said, I certainly appreciate it. It can happen to any of us, but with that being said, I suppose we shall begin.
Okay.
And I'll hand it over to you for the minutia minute because I know that nothing has happened on the front line and that Ukraine is definitely winning.
Yeah. So let's begin with the north in Volchansk. The Russians have been making steady progress for since the last show. Small little bit of gains working their way to the Vovcha River. This is part of a process where they want to create this buffer zone stretching from Sumy all the way to the Kharkov region. Um, and of course, they want to connect these two, I guess, bays or islands, if you will, these ostrovs. So you've got the Vovchansk on the right, and the other one encompasses a few towns and cities like Lukyancy, Morochovets, there's a few others. But generally, what they want is to tie these together. They basically took these two areas back in May 2024. But they've if you go to the next slide, you'll see what they're doing. They've expanded quite a bit out of Volchansk, the city, and they're now into Staritsia, uh, basically following the curve of the river, more or less. Um, Interestingly, it has come out that a mass grave was found in Kursk. So um, over 430 civilians were found killed in a mass grave. And these are mostly the Ukrainian special forces, American mercenaries, British mercenaries, Polish mercenaries, Georgian mercenaries, basically all the scum of the earth.
Yeah, the usual suspects,
The usual
the
suspects.
kind of people you would be able to convince to march into a one-way mission into Russia with delusions of victory.
Yes, yes. because they think by fighting a war against Russia will get rid of the masters that run their country. It's like,
Clearly.
anyways, this, as I've always described them, they're dumber than a sack of hammers. So there's that, and of course there were, since we're talking about the Kharkov region, immediately adjacent to it on the Russian side is the Belgorod region, and so the Ukrainians, these are with Garand. No, they attacked with HIMARS. So these are absolutely they're Americans who are behind this, at least in the guidance or targeting portion. Um, but what I'm about to tell you, yes, they attacked civilian sites, but I think it was drones that were used to attack an ambulance. So they attacked an area with HIMARS first, and an ambulance went to retrieve the wounded. And the Ukrainians then targeted the ambulance and killed 5 ambulance workers. And like again, scum of the earth, as I've always said.
And this is also nothing
Every
new.
American ally is literally shit people. So
They
that's what.
have done that in the Donbass going all the way back to 2014 for
Oh,
context.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And they always do this. The Yukis always do this when they're losing the war. They attack civilian centers just out of spite. Now, I'm not saying that the Russian. I've never known the Russians to attack off an ambulance. Yes, the Russians have attacked their energy infrastructures just as a consequence of the Ukrainians attacking oil refineries and gas refineries,
Frankly,
right?
the
But
way I would put it is the Russians will do collateral damage out of callousness, whereas the Ukrainians will do it out of sheer malice.
yes, yeah. So, in another area of the front, moving just a little bit east of Volchansk, we see another area where the buffer zone is intended to expand. Some very tiny gains today. This is on January the 25th. The next slide will show you, but essentially they want to link up these regions because it's not just that the Russians want um, Kherson, Zaporozhye, Donetsk, Lugansk, and parts of Kharkov, but they want this buffer zone in order to prevent what generally what the Ukrainians are doing now. The Ukrainians will never stop doing this. Like, I have a video from 2014 in Kiev where they have a big cake with the Russian flag and a baby on it, and they're all joking, cutting the baby and eating it. Like, they've always been like this. They're always, I mean, I don't know what it is. They've just turned into shit people. But
I mean, I hate to keep relitigating this, but even going back to Bandera's people and in the 30s and 40s, I mean, just read about the accounts of what they did in places like Lvov and Volyn. And
yeah,
I mean, I would say nothing happening right now is that severe simply because, well, I'm sure there's plenty of people who would like to be that severe. Realistically, they just can't pull that off.
yeah,
But the spirit is there. And like with you
yeah.
saying that right there, and these are the same people who will get on and kvetch about the fact that Zhirinovsky and his people carved up a cake shaped like the country of Ukraine.
Yeah, but these people preceded him, and I mean, I've watched videos where they hung a man and a woman, a couple, and the woman was pregnant.
Yeah, I mean,
I've seen like I said in 2014, I saw what they did, and I knew I would never take their side.
oh, absolutely not. And just to bolster your point, the first reports out of Kursk was the massacre of that family.
That's right.
Like the
That's right.
first reports. And I
They
don't.
also massacred a family in Seversk. It has come out that 4 or 5 male individuals who refused to fight for them in Seversk were taken out and shot. Their wife and mother has was in an interview. Like I'm just saying that they were always like this from the start. Like, I didn't see that much any cruelty from the Russians in the first year of the war, but maybe after the third year, like they've lost patience with them. So I'm not surprised if the Ukrainians have earned retaliation, but I still don't see the same kind of like it never equals them.
Oh no, and I don't want to dwell on these points for too long because it I know that we cross into when it comes to the hosting platform of the show, they get queasy when you talk about certain people doing certain things, especially if it goes against certain narratives. And also, for the sake of getting through the minutia minute,
Yeah, yeah.
not to downplay any of this, but
No,
I
let's. Yeah, I mean, it'll come in handy because later, if we
certainly
talk about Putin, some more um, evidence has come out that when Trump said that Putin was lying about targeting him, it's not the case. The chips that were found, and I'll talk in the drones that were piloted towards Putin's residence. But you're right. Let's get back. Where were we? So yes, why don't we go to Kupiansk now? I've not been able to update anything on Kupiansk for a while because it's been off the radar. And really, what you're looking at now, this map is from the 20th of January, and you can see that the Russians have lost most of Kupiansk, the city, but they're still holding on to some of the industrial sector and everything, almost everything on the east side of the Oskal River. Now, you see those lines, those squiggly lines that are neither orange or blue. I remember the last show that we did, I said, I don't know what's going to become of them because that just means like maybe one or two units pushed ahead, got really far, and eventually they stopped. Maybe they entrenched themselves, maybe not, I don't know. And now we finally see that at least with the southern push, or the push rather going from east to west rather than from north to south, has had some success. They have taken control of some of the ditches, and they've taken over parts of Pishane. Pishane is encircled right now. It's a small town outside of Kupiansk, and you can see Kupiansk is on the left side. Um, so here's a close up of Pishiane. You can see where the Russians had pushed formally. They're still not colored because it is uncertain what has happened there. But the Russians have managed to at least capitalize with the bigger push, the east to west push. This is an overall strategy. You'll see in the big blow up here what it is that the Russians want to do. Now, south of Kupiansk, of course, we have fighting in Liman, fighting west of Seversk, and fighting, around the Bakhmut area, but it's quite west of there. So what they want to do is they want to connect these three towns. Now, the Russians control Bakhmut and they control Seversk, and they have enough buffer that they can transport everything they need from Donetsk city, from the south. And eventually, what they'll want is the same for Liman. So they want to create this north-south axis that connects them with Donetsk. I imagine because it's faster for them to do that than it is to go straight across the Lugansk and Donetsk provinces into Liman. There aren't the roads simply don't. There's not many roads of substantive size that can support, like, let's say, armored columns or very heavy trucks that make it easier for them. So um, the access has to be from Liman, Seversk, Bakhmut, Donetsk. It has to go in that order, and that's what these arrows represent. That's the strategy that they're working on. If we go to the next slide, as you can see, I've circled where Seversk is, so you can see that the Russians have gained quite a lot of territory around it. Now, I should mention that History Legend has come out with a video today about the fall of Seversk, and two very surprising facts, although I shouldn't have been surprised, was the corruption on the Russian side and the Ukrainian side. With the Russian side, it seemed to have been that the forces that were fighting under, let's say, the Russian flag were the former Lugansk militias. And they had a lot of difficulty getting even close to Seversk. They never got within more than within 20 kilometers of the outskirts. That should be noted. It's not like the Russians were ever that close, with one exception, and that was, I believe, in the summer of 2022 when they were northwest of it. But it turns out that these guys were corrupt. They were buying and selling equipment, apparently even with the Ukrainians, or siphoning it off, so it wouldn't be spent on material that was necessary for battles. They lied about losses. They lied about gains. And as it turns out, the same thing occurred with the Ukrainians, with at least some of their elite brigades. I don't want to talk too much about it because it's worth watching. It's a very good video, and like any video by a history legend, it's detailed, it's well
Autistic
presented,
detail. That's it.
autistic levels of detail.
Everything you need to know.
And by the way, I know there were people who were saying, "Oh, he's German. Oh, he's this." Now, I always thought he was French, and I think he. I'll tell you what he is. He's French Canadian. I guarantee you, he's French Canadian.
Oh yeah, I thought that was common knowledge at this
eat.
point.
Okay, because there was somebody who said no, he's German. He's not. His accent's wrong for German.
Yeah, and number two, look how swarthy he is. It's like there's some sort of Southern European admixture in there, in which case the French
Yeah.
technically count towards that.
Yeah, the French do have a north-south split. You know, kind of like the Italians. It's not as strong, maybe. I don't know.
No,
But
not nearly as strong. Look, there's a reason why Levantine pops up on my DNA test, but I'll just leave it at that.
so anyways, worth a watch. The problem with the Ukrainians, which is kind of endemic, uh, having followed this war now for almost 5 years, is if they lose territory, their commanders in Kiev will tell them, "You have to get that territory right back." Not defensive line, not a new defensive line, not a new strategy, not like finding a new place that could be a choke point for the Russians, and you attrit the Russians and then you can surprise, none of that. No, you have to get it right back, right? Because it looks bad. Again, optics, obsession with optics. And it is for this reason that three of their commanders lied about how many men were necessary to protect Seversk. Anyways, uh, that's it. That's all I'll say for Seversk. But now let's move. I don't want to dwell too much on the Konstantinovka Chasov Yar area because, frankly, it's just a little gain. So let's go into Konstantinovka. Now the Russians have been pressuring this area. Um, yeah, that slide that you got there just shows you where Bakhmut is and where Konstantinovka is, right? Like in relation, right?
Yeah, that's the one with the outlines. I can move on to the next one.
Yeah, and Konstantinovka represents the southern terminus of this economic amalgamation of Konstantinovka, Kramatorsk, and Slavyansk. Of course, you can't take those towns until you take Liman first and Konstantinovka second. So, as you can see, the Russians have reinserted themselves back into Konstantinovka, but this time further into it. The next slide will show you generally what their plans will be. So, um, the area that's circled, out of which the three arrows are radiating, this is an industrial area. Now, the arrow on the right side, that also has areas with high rises. And you can see that the Russians they're still in the residential areas, but they're approaching the high rises. If the Russians can take this spot. Essentially, I would argue it would be like Kupiansk. They would have the stronghold, and even if they lost some other areas, they could still hold on to the majority of the city. The next slide is just a blow up of the area that they took today, which is a rather small area. It's one block by 4 or 5 blocks. As you can see, they're getting closer and closer to the industrial area, the railroad station, and just a little further the other areas. Um, Next, we're going to move to the Dnipropetrovsk Zaporozhye area, and anyways, these are both towns that have gone back and forth. Neither side quite capturing them. Ivanovka is the one that you see with the purple outline. The Ukrainians reinserted themselves here. The Russians are now moving. They control the vast majority of the town, but they're also wanting to go to Novopavlovka, which they control a part of already. This will be necessary to secure the other areas west of Pokrovsk. This area is, it's significantly south of Pokrovsk, but it is a necessity. It's actually closer to Gulyapolye. Next, we go to Zaporozhye. And honestly, the last few days, this is an area where the Russians have made considerable gains. And you can see that they're eating into the first line of defense going from west to east. But it hasn't stopped the Ukrainians from retaking a prison or part of a prison in an industrial area in Tokmachka, which is the next slide. And after the general slide of Malotokmachka, you'll see the blow up I have of it. Yeah, so the Russians are kind of on the outskirts of the industrial area. This is not an easy area for them to take, so they will have to work very hard to retake this area. Anyhow, just to shift back to Zaporozhye, you can see that the Russians are making considerable gains here. And then we have a blow up of this Zaporozhye area. Now, south of where these gains are taking place, the Ukrainians are in the higher ground. So before the Russians can move north, they're going to have to continue to go west along the defenses. And it's probably the safest route to do so because at least the trenches offer some amount of protection. But it'll also mean that they'll have to travel in smaller teams rather than in armored columns. And that's it. That's all I have for frontline news.
Very concise as always, and I do think all that leads into the wider war going on in Ukraine right now, the one that is really bringing the squeeze to civilian life, and that is this ongoing energy war, where it seems at this point, since really the assassination attempt on Putin at Valdai, which, as you were alluding to, Trump probably had more to do with than he was willing to admit to, the power grid, it's been open season on the power grid in Ukraine. And
Yeah.
you can look at a number of any of the nighttime maps, and I do have to say, I'm a bit more cautious in light of the show intro of showing stuff on screen because I know that is one of the ways that they can try to auto flag you. So forgive me for not having as many visuals as I would like to, but there are plenty of satellite images of Europe at night, and you can see the literal black hole that is Ukraine.
Yes,
And
and many articles
well,
from big publications. I
yeah,
mean, from established publications like New York Times, Washington Post, Times of London, etc.
an overwhelming amount. And I believe it was either last week or last episode that we did. I was repeating Klitschko's words that he had advised anyone with means to leave Kiev to leave Kiev. And this has been nationwide, not only in Kiev. But you can also see the videos on the streets. And there is a bit of a cruel irony to it because these people are living the way that Poroshenko said the people of the Donbass would be living. Their children are in the basements. They're the ones on the streets without power, having to huddle around just open flames in order to stay warm. And I don't say this to relish in the fact that the wider civilian population of Ukraine is going through this. In many ways, I think that their government in Kiev is just as, if not more, responsible for their current situation than anyone in the Kremlin is. And I don't think that's a controversial take at all, considering the direction of this war, considering the direction of the diplomacy, considering everything that could have been done to prevent it from getting to this point that has been subsequently trampled on by Zelensky and his Western sponsors. But this is the price that is having to be paid by the general population of Ukraine for this war. And it really is a fine line you have to walk, because even in parts of Ukraine you would not expect, there's more sympathy for Russia to be found than one would expect, even all the way into some parts of central Ukraine. Now, of course, their voices have been shut up. They're not people who can really openly speak about this. These people also might have qualms with the current Russian administration, the way Putin has prosecuted this war. I'm not going to reveal any sources, but I have seen some talk about this, some ethnic Russians still in Ukrainian-controlled Ukraine who actually have a lot of resentment for Putin and the Kremlin for not having prosecuted this war faster or not have taken more decisive action in 2014. And I'll hold off on my opinion on whether that's the correct take or not, or getting into the details on that. But point being is that is their perspective. But ultimately, these are people who would like to see some degree of reunification with Russia, either through formal means or through closer interstate relations between Ukraine and Russia. So point being is a lot of those people exist, and a lot of those people are the same ones, much like their, I guess you could say, Banderite quote-unquote countrymen who are also suffering through this. And also, I think it's worth noting that the people getting black vanned mostly come from these areas where the opinions on Russia, Ukraine, the war are a bit more mixed. They're from places in central and eastern Ukraine where these people are being black vanned. Now, you have seen it stretch into western Ukraine as manpower shortages continue to intensify. But point being is, to talk about the civilian cost of this war, it's unavoidable to talk about really the divided loyalties of the population. And just getting down to the real roots of this conflict going back to at least 2014, if not before that. And while ultimately I don't think one can look at from a purely strategic standpoint say that Russia is doing anything quote-unquote wrong by doing this, I do think we have to acknowledge the reality of the situation. Which brings me to my next point, was some polling done by, I believe it was the Kiev Institute of Sociology. Let me look to see the exact source here. Yes, that was the Kiev International Institute of Sociology. Their most recent report says about 55% of Ukrainians want a peace agreement with Russia, while 32 respondents are against it. And a further 39% of that 55% agree with surrendering the entirety of the Donbass to Russia, but under the caveat that there's Western security guarantees, etc., etc., etc. So once again, you have this contradictory position held by the Ukrainian population where we want to preserve our sovereignty, yet we want to have a negotiated settlement to end this war. Where there's people who fundamentally agree with the aims of the war, but do not like the reality of the war. In which case, no, I can't blame them. I certainly would not want to live in those conditions. I do not envy any of those people. But it does show the mental roadblock in a significant amount of those people who think that this can just be ended if, I don't know, the West, bares their teeth a little more and threatens Russia just a little bit more, and that they'll back down. Because I do think that's a significant amount of the Ukrainian population. They think that the West is just, holding back, and that if they were just a little meaner to Russia, then... I mean, I'll talk about it later, but listen to Zelensky's Davos speech talking about, these sanctions are great, but can't you guys do just a little bit more? Blah, 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 blah. Where there's also the situation with the population who are just ready to make those territorial concessions or ready to say, screw it. And that's not even counting the ones who are who stay behind these frontline villages in order to be absorbed into Russia. But another thing I thought was interesting about these energy strikes is somebody pulled a screenshot from the NATO website about the record of the 1999 bombing campaign in Yugoslavia, and they removed a segment that said, quote, NATO will continue to attack energy facilities in Serbia if it harms civilians, depriving them of water and electricity. That is the problem of Milosevic. Given NATO 5 conditions, it will stop, end quote. And just over the weekend, that segment documenting the NATO war in Yugoslavia disappeared from their website. So make of that what you will. It strikes on.
I mean, but Zelensky in his Davos speech was even berating the Europeans again for not doing more, and actually, ironically, France seized another Russian tanker the day he made that speech. So, I mean, I think the fact of the matter is that the Europeans are doing what they can. I don't think they're holding back. We've talked about this for years on this show, that if they were very serious about confronting Russia, if they really wanted to confront Russia, they would have increased their military-industrial complex to accommodate what it is that Ukraine needs. That would include America. But America is right now content for the war to go on at the pace that it's going on. The Russians, of course, are going slow because I think they expect that the war will not end and that eventually a showdown with Europe is inevitable. So, in that sense, in their minds, they're not going to take the bait.
No.
But Ukraine literally Ukraine's existence is to attrit Russia,
and
while they get attrited.
They have been open about that since before this conflict started. I think the most egregious example of somebody who's been open about this is Lindsey Graham, who outright said, the Ukrainians are dying in our place, and that the more Russians we can kill, the better for us. Where there's no pretense, there's no talking about how Ukraine is the first line of defense in the face of democracy versus despotism or whatever nonsense narrative they want to spin. But no, you have him outright come and say, yeah, they are dying in our stead, they're dying in your stead, so you should support Ukraine infinitely. And that is the ultimate position of the West. That's what people like, say, Macron and Starmer are too sheepish to say, but if you read into their words, if you read it in between the lines, that is what they say time and time and time again. And we've said this from the beginning of the conflict. Several other people have said this from the beginning of the conflict. It doesn't matter how much Ukrainian blood is spilled because they do not care about the Ukrainian nation. They do not care about the Ukrainian people. They don't even care about, say, the delusional Western Ukrainian nationalist. As far as they're concerned, it's all the same. Russians are fighting Russians as far as they're concerned. They couldn't ask for more in this scenario. And that's why they tried to do the same thing to Belarus in 2020. Because they saw that as fighting amongst the Russian world, which is good enough for them. And that they'll dangle the promise of NATO in front of it. I mean, Arestovich said as much, take his word for what you will, but saying that this war, this sacrifice is our cost of admission into NATO and the European Union. And if you ask me, it's a pretty high cost of admission, and it's something that ultimately is not going to be fulfilled. The security guarantees are going to be just that, paper thin. I mean, even just look at, I'm getting ahead of myself, but even just look at NATO Article 5. The text of it says we pledge to support an ally under attack. There's no question of any particular military actions, any particular economic actions. It just has a very vague clause of support, which could be something as little as a pat on the back and say, best of luck, champ, which is how many people would have you think the Ukrainians are conducting this war effort, even though that's not exactly the case. That's far from the case. But point being is, there may come a day where that is the case, where it's like support is simply just moral support because they're out of things to give you, or they decided it's not cost efficient to support you anymore. And I know I'm at risk of repeating myself. I am repeating myself here. But this should be a lesson to Poland, to Romania, to the Baltic states, to Hungary, who I think has internalized this lesson a bit more, but to all these countries outside of the original NATO coalition. NATO is not there to defend you. You are there to defend NATO. And that is all they have ever viewed you as.
Right.
I'll
There to
reference
be a
it once
spearhead
again.
for American interests.
Soros, 1993, he said as much. You people
Pardon me.
are the meat wave when Russia doesn't submit. He said it a little more eloquently, but that was the premise of his message in his 1993 write-up. That you people, we're going to throw you wave after wave until Russia collapses. And don't think this doesn't apply to the Western Europeans either. And I'll talk about this a little more when we talk about the Greenland thing. But the French, the British, the Germans, they'll be sent in before the Americans. They'll be sent in before Washington sends its own people because it's more politically popular that way. And like I said, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself here because I don't want to talk quite about U.S.-European relations just yet. But I did want to dive into a little bit of the so-called diplomacy that's going on with Kushner and Witkoff wasting more of Putin's time and having the formalities of a quote-unquote summit, which is apparently...
And it always ends the same way. It always ends the same way. The last words of Zelensky at every one of these ridiculous peace negotiations is Ukraine will, when he knows, like the whole thing was a sham anyways, he'll say, Ukraine will not concede any territory.
Yes, once the bag is secured, he will say the line.
Yes.
Every time, and he said the line today that no, I'm not withdrawing from Donbass. We're not gonna do that. And then Kushner and Witkoff scuttle off, tell Trump what happened, the ultimate outcome of it. Trump finger wags at one or both sides, and then you rinse and repeat. But I don't know if these are going to be any more substantial. The Dubai talks that happened over this weekend between Igor Kostulikov, Igor Kostulikov, who is a member of the Russian General Staff, met with not Budanov, but Budanov's people. Budanov was...
Because Budanov has been promoted now.
Yes. But he met with his underlings. And we're still awaiting a full, real readout of the talks, but there were the Russian representatives, the Ukrainian representatives, and a U.S. delegation. Once again, the U.S. trying to present itself as a neutral mediator and not a participant in this conflict, when any honest negotiations would be U.S.-Russian negotiations, because we all know who calls the shots at NATO, we all know who calls the shots in Ukraine, and we all know what's going on with the Russian side. The way to end this war, and I'm becoming increasingly pessimistic that it can be ended by diplomatic means, is direct U.S.-Russian talks. There were hints of that in Alaska. There were hints of that with the proposed follow-up in Budapest, but those never followed through. And look, I'm not here to defend Trump. I'm sure everyone who's listened to the show long enough, especially over the course of this past year, knows that I've pretty much soured on him. I really don't have much use for him at this point. But there was the glimmer of hope that he kind of understood what was going on. But every time he pulls back. I don't even want to necessarily say it's entirely his fault, because even if he wanted to pursue bilateral negotiations with the Russians to end this conflict in some sort of concrete way that would prevent future conflict for the foreseeable future, he would be working against a behemoth of a system that does not allow that to happen. Somebody who has Lindsey Graham constantly whispering into his ear is not going to be able to make that decision even if he wants to. It is just that simple. And I suppose with that we can move on to.
Well, we should say that it's come out recently. I guess some people have known all along, or have known for a while, that Truman and Eisenhower both said that, and it's uncertain if Kennedy said it. That's been omitted from the record if he had. That should a NATO ally, now they both stressed that this wouldn't be a major NATO ally, so it wouldn't be, let's say, Germany. Uh, Italy's a different story. France, of course, as you know, de Gaulle took France out of NATO.
Yeah. Um,
But if it was a small country,
like even like Greece, who were they willing to throw to the wolves on the Cyprus crisis in 1974,
right,
just for an example.
inter NATO bickering, and wow, America is such a friend of the West.
Pull
What
up the Kissinger quote.
more Judeo than Christian to allow the Muslims on Cyprus to take half the island. So let's say if maybe it would have been a conflict on that little border between Norway and Russia. Um, I can't imagine over what, but let's say there was. They're not going to intervene, right?
No.
They're not going to intervene. Um, Even Italy, if there was some issue in one of the Mediterranean islands, they're not going to intervene. And I think the Russians know that. I think, and the Russian media is now extremely hawkish after the attempt on Putin's life, and it should be. So here's just a few salient facts, and I promise we'll move on to the next subject, and that is the chips that were inside the drones are the same chips with the same guidance system as the American Tomahawk system. So they don't rely on satellites. They have a kind of they have um, photo like photo sensors and radar sensors. And what happens when they're in flight? So the drone is just a slow. Let's consider it like a slow Tomahawk, and they fly halfway to their target. They will take snaps. And some of those could be with radar, and they have an internal system that has already mapped it out and see if they're still on course, because of course the winds and so on and so forth, they're dodging maybe some air defense systems that weren't there before. They will re-steer the missile or the drone. But on top of that, the CIA also supplies minute-to-minute information through their satellite systems, even though it's not hooked up to them, in order to guide them. So it has like an internal guidance built in, a map, if you will, that relays back to the command center once it's taken the snaps, but it's also self-referential. Now, the chips inside, now that the Russians know that the chips inside match those of the Tomahawk missiles that were used in Syria. Remember way back, Trump fired some Tomahawk missiles in Syria, and some of them landed in a field. They didn't hit anything, and so they have those chips. So those chips are manufactured by the Germans. However, the according to Scott Ritter, NATO does not do the targeting. America does the targeting for these systems. America does not share this information with NATO. So you can tell that the Americans are desperate to change the course of the war in Ukraine by other means. And they want to threaten Putin into making a decision. So they're playing a game of chicken with him. Anyways, that's all I wanted to say.
No, I'm glad you brought that up. In terms of the question of Eisenhower and Truman and possibly even Kennedy reneging on NATO promises to the outlying members, I once again bring up the question: what hope does Poland have in such a situation? What hope do the Baltic states have in such a situation? What hope does Romania have in such a situation? Which once again establishes you are there to fight for them. They are not there to fight for you. And that is what all these countries need to understand about NATO. And I will say, going back, Eisenhower
was only used once, and it was just for 9/11.
Yes, and I actually have a little bit on that might get controversial, but I told you about it. But I have some certain feelings about that, and I'll have to elaborate on. But to Eisenhower's credit, at least I will say, he had the foresight, number one, not to get involved in the Hungarian Revolution. What one may think of that is something else, but America staying its hand there was ultimately for the best in terms of global stability. Number one. Number two, he also had the foresight to realize Austrian style neutrality would have been beneficial for nations like Poland and, of course, for just global stability in general, where there was some level of understanding that, America was less deranged back then. Let me just put it that way. Much less deranged. Where there was some understanding of what it takes to actually have great power politics with any sort of longevity. But I'm getting off track here because speaking of deranged, we have quite a bit to talk about with the Davos speeches of both Zelensky and Donald Trump. And I'll start with Zelensky.
And Carney.
Who could forget about Mark Carney? I guess according to like the right wing media, China's Trojan horse or whatever.
What I love is before Davos, Trump said, "I hope China and Canada make a really good deal." They make a They make a really good deal. Oh my God, China is devouring Canada before I can devour it.
Before the Indians can.
Yeah, before the Indians can, yeah.
But the basic points I had from the Zelensky speech.
It's up to you, Canada. You can be a curry or a barbecue. Wow, so nice. Thanks, Donald.
Yeah, I'm glad you guys are in such a nice position. But the points I had for Zelensky's speech, the two ones that stuck out is number one, the simultaneous accosting and praising of Western nations and leaders, where they're the greatest thing, but also they need to step up and do more. And Trump is such a great man. He's working for us for peace and agreement, but also tisk 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 over Greenland or whatever. Where it's just this. Zelensky's is at his wit's end, and as much as I don't like the guy, you can't really blame him considering his situation because he sees the writing on the wall. He knows what's going to happen, and he knows he only has so much time to secure his golden parachute and get the hell out of there. In which case, I think he would like to negotiate a clean exit, but if his life and livelihood is on the line, we'll see him scurry like a rat off a sinking ship, which is, in my opinion, probably the more likely outcome. And then the other bizarre one that's also not shocking at all was his open campaigning against Orban without naming him, saying there's some countries in Europe who want their cities to be little Moscows and feel more comfortable in Russia than they do in the West, etc., etc., etc. Just this very veiled chiding of any nation that insufficiently supports Ukraine, which was targeted at primarily at Hungary, secondarily at Slovakia, and then probably a few other ones you could piece in there, depending on how much you want to read into the speech. But I do have to say, it was a touch entertaining watching Zelensky express his frustration towards Western leaders, where he's talking about, you guys are such great friends, but I also hate you for not supporting me enough, but can we still be such great friends? I'll say he didn't seem like he was on his usual magic powder, if you're picking up what I'm putting down. He seemed pretty subdued in this speech. But that could also be due to the fact that he was speaking in English, which is a language he clearly does not have a very good command on, if you've ever heard him speak at any length in English, like I just did before this show.
Yeah.
But we could move on to the arguably more interesting, arguably less interesting Davos speech of Donald Trump, and
Yeah.
how we're going to get Greenland, and that how this is his monomaniacal focus from this point forward, and that he's like a dog with a bone. And he's dubbed it a big beautiful piece of ice, so that's his number one thing. Saying that we need to secure it for our Arctic security. We took it in World War II, therefore we should be able to keep it.
He is
he is such an idiot. Like, what do you mean you took it in World War II?
Hey,
Who did you take it from?
have you ever played Axis and Allies? And have you ever seen green on the map? It's green, therefore it's an American territory in Axis and Allies. So that's good enough for me. It's good enough for Trump. But continuing on from that, uh, saying that we had no choice but to act. It was our obligation to do so in World War II. So we'll do that again if Greenland's ever under threat. But we need to acquire Greenland so we can do what we want there, despite the fact that we more or less have excavation rights and base rights to more or less wherever we want, barring strategic weapons, which led to a funny proposed compromise from Mark Rutte, not even the Danish government, but Rutte went straight to daddy, circumventing anyone else, and proposed a sovereign base agreement where Denmark gets to keep Greenland, but the American operating bases are legally considered U.S. territory. Similar to the aforementioned Cyprus with the way British
Yes.
bases operate there.
Yeah.
And as we know, Cyprus, just as we were saying, we're something like 40% of the island is occupied by Turks, another quarter by British bases. If I'm looking at that, that's not. And look, I'll report back when I get back from vacation about what the situation on the ground looks like there. But I have a feeling it's going to confirm my biases uh, when I'm over there, not in Greenland, in Cyprus, about why it seems like a disaster of an agreement that hasn't even been agreed to. But the mutual trade war threats came out where Trump is, I'm going to tear you into oblivion if you don't give up Greenland. And then the Europeans said, well, we're going to pull out of the $850 billion trade deal that Ursula signed in Scotland. That was a terrible deal in the first place. And then both sides started to sweat. Both sides got nervous, and it led to this mutual backing down, which was the lead up to this Rutte meeting, where Rutte said, Daddy, please don't take all of Greenland. We'll give you just little piecemeal parts of it so you can put your nukes there and you can scare off the Russians. Because our little NATO mission didn't do enough to scare off the Russians. We didn't put them there to intimidate you. It was simply an exercise against Russia, was what the COPE was, which is all what we knew the COPE was going to be.
Yeah.
But before I get further into U.S.-European disputes over Greenland, I do think it's funny because Putin did weigh in on the subject, saying that he was saying he thought it was Danish territory and should remain, and that if the Greenlanders want to have the referendum, so be it. But he couldn't help himself, and he went into like a detailed historical analysis of why Trump would want it and what the U.S. geostrategic outlook is. It once again all very entertaining about how he approached these things. Where no, they can't talk to Russia. The response to Greenland has to be to triple down on aid to Ukraine because Europe is now threatened from both sides. Ooh. Yeah, that's
Oh yeah.
the fall of Seversk, the impending fall of Konstantinivka. That is the threat to European civilization. Getting your territories and former colonies ripped by you piece by piece, that's nothing. But Russian control of left bank Ukraine, that is the collapse.
Over.
That is the collapse of civilization, my friend, and I can tell you that much. And what I did think was interesting from this is Trump went on his normal tirade about, well, what has NATO ever done for us, et cetera, which understandably earned the ire of many in Europe who contributed troops to these American wars in both Iraq and Afghanistan. And like I said, I do sympathize, and I can definitely see why they feel insulted. But at the same time, my more callous, less charitable side also can't help but think fell for it again award. like, what did you think the arrangement was between NATO and America? What did you think the purpose of the alliance was? I know one of the right wing sloganeering things that likes to get thrown around is a purpose of a system is what it does. Well, what does NATO do? It serves the interests of the American empire at the expense of everyone else, including the core population of the American empire and certainly the population of Europe. So I'm sorry, what what was the expectation here? Did you think that you were going to be rewarded with your share of the plunder for going into Iraq or Afghanistan or saying this in, or did you just expect a pat on the back? Like what was the expectation here? And also, I do have to say, I don't want to get too far off on a tangent, but something I have noticed, especially once they brought up the sovereign base agreement part, is just the absolute paper thin nature of so-called European solidarity in these times, where because of Trump's blow beating about Greenland, and look, he probably is mostly serious that he does want some sort of arrangement that would effectively put Greenland under American control. This level of solidarity was not shown for the, say, aforementioned Cyprus when the Turks literally invaded part of Europe once again, as they have for centuries. There was no concern for Hungary when the Ukrainians tried to blow up South Stream. There's no concern for Poland, who has been victim of numerous false flag attacks coming from the Ukrainians that have cost Polish lives, including those two farmers, when that S-300 missile hit Poland back in 2022. There's no great show of European solidarity for that. There's no great show of European solidarity for Poland and Slovakia and Hungary and Romania when Ukraine sent the contaminated grain. And once again, it shows you the real nature of this system. It shows you the countries that are the cannon fodder and the countries that are the quote-unquote beneficiaries. And of course, beneficiary, that's a fine line between when you become cannon fodder and when you become beneficiary. Because the East, they can take all the abuse we can hurl at them. Poland can be the front for our proxy war with Belarus and have to deal with the back and forth migrant deportation wars with Belarus because we're the ones who... Now, I'm sure that there were plenty of willing participants in Poland, but they're the ones who were used as a forward operating base for regime change in Belarus, a regime change attempt in Belarus. So they can do that. They can be at the forefront of that. All the countries that border Turkey, they have to take the antics of Erdogan because we need to keep him on side in case anything were to really go down in the Caucasus. We need an ally there. But once Trump threatens Greenland, we need to close ranks because the optics of threatening a Western European country, even though Western Europe has been trampled all over by the American Empire, plenty, but the optics of threatening a Western European country like that, that's no good. But being Scandinavians, and not that the Finns are Scandinavians, but you notice like these Nordic countries, no matter what happens, for some reason their fist is always shaking towards Russia, even when Trump is directly threatening Greenland.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, the whole Greenland thing is kind of fascinating because, like, I mean, if Trump wanted to, he could just ask for more bases. They would have given them more bases, right? Now, guys like Brian Berletic, and I don't disagree with him necessarily, think this is just kayfabe. It's all kabuki. It's not real.
Yeah, it's a very public divorce for ulterior motives.
Right. It's mainly meant to fool Russia and China. So, if Trump is going to get parts of Greenland for his bases, that and mind you, bases like in Europe that are technically not American property, like Ramstein, the Germans pay for all of that, probably including all the sex workers and underage child trafficking. But that's another story.
That allegedly happens. We're not making any definitive claims, et cetera, et cetera.
So he could have had that. Why not just have that? Again, it could be also economic, and I have like a little graph to send your way. Forgive me. There it is.
Uh-oh.
So the minerals. What are the minerals that Greenland has? Now, I bring this up not because Greenland has a lot of minerals. It does. But to point out that this is a long-term strategy by the U.S., right? Like everybody knows, Russia and China were not about to take over Greenland, and they weren't going to demand Greenland, like give up its territory so they could build something there. As far as I know, I don't even know if the Chinese have made an offer. They may or may not have.
If they want to build an Arctic death beam, I have that on good authority.
An Arctic death beam pointed at Washington. Dun, dun, dun.
And Tel Aviv, by the way. Don't
and
ask
Tel
why.
Aviv. Okay, based. So, anyways, why go through all this trouble? Well, it could be economics, and now America, as far as I know, has only one icebreaker, and it did have the world's largest land mobile drilling unit, which today fell over in Alaska.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. So, and they don't have, I don't know how many they have of these, but it's not very many. And this was the largest one apparently in the world, and it just keeled over, kind of like, I don't know, like an obelisk falling over, except it has a big base.
I mean, it was a rather symbolic moment of Western deindustrialization, but that's another point.
Right. So America would have to invest a lot of money. It's just like Venezuela. Like, they would need to invest hundreds of billions of dollars to extract all this stuff. It's, I suppose, they would know better than I would, but it wouldn't be easy. And if they were really serious about this, why not have built like a second icebreaker? Like, why? Like, what's the hurry? To me, it seems like it's something, the logic implies it's long term, but I tend to think it's something short term. Even building these bases. Now, America did have 5 bases, of which only one is left. The Danes removed an entire village of Inuits in order for the Americans to have the Thule base, which is on the western shore of Greenland. The eastern shore is in fact more formidable, stormier, colder than the west. The other thing that they foresee, and maybe it won't be the Trump administration, maybe it'll be the upcoming Gavin Newsom administration. Let's take a look at some. I was watching CSIS. So let's begin with what the ice cap was between 1981 and 2010. Thank you for humoring me, by the way. Okay. So you can see that the ice cap is rather large. Now, the worst of it is actually on the North American side, the NATO side. Now, even if it weren't there, all those islands, like the smaller islands in and around and west of Baffin Island, these are notoriously difficult to navigate. And of course, there have been several. There was at least one or two British expeditions that ended in tragedy here, right? The Russian side has always been more navigable. And so this is what it looked like up until 2010. Now I'm going to send you something of what it looks like now.
Maybe they are using the Arctic death beam.
We're doomed.
Okay, I'll get updated one up too.
No more Netflix.
Oh, it's Jover.
Jover.
Brandon could have prevented this.
Yeah, so this is what it is now. Now, it's still more difficult for the Americans to navigate these islands than it is for the Russians. And the Russians, well, clearly, like, they now have an area around the Yamal Peninsula that isn't affected temporarily by the ice cap. That doesn't mean there's no ice there, by the way. You still need icebreakers. But the worst of it, which is what this outline is much smaller. So I think what they're really worried about, they are worried about, where things will be 50 years from now. And let me show you what CSIS thinks it will be 50 years from now. So as you can see, it's tiny, and it only overlaps northern Greenland and one of the Canadian islands. I know it's not Baffin. I forget the name of this island, but you can see if the Americans want to interdict Chinese trade using the Arctic, this is what they'll do it from. Now, Iceland may not even be the 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 next territory that they'll want to claim as their own. Um, it will be, what is it?
Svalbard.
Spitsberg, yeah, or Spitsberg. Uh, the one that used to have like Russian coal miners used to work there. They had some rights, and I think it belongs to Norway. If I'm
Yeah,
not
I think that
mistaken.
one's Svalbard.
Yeah, Svalbard. So that'll be the next one. But eventually, what they will want to do is to interdict as much as possible Chinese trade, because that is what they're doing in the South Pacific and the you know Sino Indo-Pacific, right? Uh, so, um, and that's why the Chinese are building islands, because there's no way for them to establish safe trade routes without doing so. It isn't because they're going to land and overtake the Philippines. It's because they know eventually the Americans will get so upset that they'll do something crazy. And that's also another reason why, ever since we had that little mini crash in 2008, and China decided to go for the One Belt One Road, is because they want to stop China from developing any kind of economic autonomy. So, just to give you an idea of the routes, this is the current route that the Russians use. Right, you can see why the Americans would like to stop this. Now, will they invest in minerals? I don't know. It'll probably be maybe a Democrat, because I don't know how vocal the Democrats are about all of this. Like, you'd think they would be feigning embarrassment, but my impression from a Canadian point of view is they're awfully quiet, right? They're awfully quiet.
Yes,
They're
and
not, they're not saying anything, which means whatever Trump establishes, they'll continue with that.
I have noticed that they've been finger wagging at the idea, but none of them have promised to revoke it if it goes through.
Right. It's kind of like under Biden, once he got elected, he had this program, billions of dollars for any startup company and farms, as long as they weren't white male owned. Trump still continues that program.
Naturally.
Right? So, naturally, yeah.
And
And it'll
then,
be whatever token resistance the Democrats may have offered at this point, they'll just accept it as the new reality later.
well, one of the things I've been thinking about this whole Greenland thing is the biggest problem is the optics, and I could see a scenario where Europe manages to stay this until January 20th, 2029, in which point they will hand over the deed to Greenland to Gavin Newsom. And it probably wouldn't be that.
You're right. You're right, because I mean, clearly there's two globalist camps. One of them is Zionist, and the other one is less Zionist.
Yeah, the other one is, you know, we'll protect Israel, but they're not our main priority, versus Israel is our main priority.
Right.
And
Right. But you saw the struggle. You saw what happened to that struggle in November 2023, and that was those elites who are, you know, they're all globalists, but more globalist, less ziocentric. You saw what happened. Um, you know, all those, shit-lived deans in American universities had to shut up because Jewish donors were just not going to supply them with money anymore. And
yeah,
that revealed and this is just months before Trump went on his campaign, that revealed which of these two elites is more powerful.
Yeah,
And incidentally, when I said that if Putin invades, COVID, it's over. It's partly part of that was because I thought that this other group of elites would say it's time for us now to take over the reins. It doesn't mean they don't work in tandem to some degree, but they are in opposition. They do have slightly different visions on how to get to where they want to be.
yes,
Which is still the dominant power of the planet, but in different ways.
these are internal rivals towards the same goal ultimately.
Right. I think the problem that the Democrats have is they see how Israel squandered all its reputation that it built up with literally foisted by innumerable Holocaust museums. And in many ways, they see, and this is more of the European globalist elites, they see how America is doing something similar to that. Like, is America so poor that they can't pay little Denmark to reestablish their bases, or for their companies to, dig up some minerals in the next 20, 30 years for next to nothing, right? I mean, most of it is just a stopgap to make sure that the Chinese don't do it.
Yes.
But we don't know if the Chinese will, because the Chinese have only so much capacity. They're already doing 90%, but I can guarantee you,
And especially with
the Americans will not be refining anything.
and I do have to say, as far as the China angle is concerned, especially with the rapid breakdown in economic relations between Europe and Russia after the Ukraine war, I could see the Chinese being very hesitant to invest further into Europe, even though that seems to be the push by some of these Euro globalists that you were alluding to, that China can be our counterbalance for economic woes, or even say like somebody like Mark Carney saying that. But I would imagine the Chinese have to see the bigger picture here and realize, well, 300 billion in Russian frozen assets, that could be 300 billion in Chinese frozen assets if anything were to go down with Taiwan.
Right. And speaking of Chinese frozen assets, the Russians have made back 62% of them because gold is through the roof.
I thought it's because they plundered all those washing machines.
Yeah, it is. I'm going to send you another graph just to show you what is China doing. Because remember, about 10, 11 months ago, Japan dumped the most amount of basically American securities, right? Bonds. Forgive me, I have it here, yes.
Okay.
And that trend is continuing, including China, which was not the biggest dumper of U.S. treasuries. So this is the way that the trend is going. The de-dollarization is still happening. It may be temporary. I don't know for absolute certainty what's going to happen. But it seems like the Americans are, willing to escalate the situation in order not to make a deal that would put them, let's say, parallel to the Chinese, where they would maintain their hegemonic position.
Yes, and that seems to be the problem with the U.S. both vis-a-vis Russia and China, where they're not willing to take a small amount of losses to secure a comfortable long-term position, but rather seek, I guess you could say, conquest or domination in a very slim hope of supplanting them, cannibalizing them, and then continuing on until they have to do that again. Where they're going for double or nothing, as it were, versus the safe bet, which, given our elites, isn't surprising. But as somebody, and that's not just as an American, but just somebody who lives in this world, in this global economy, what to bear the consequences of, that's not something I like to see. And as much as I might sit here on the show and complain about the American empire, whatever, I understand the importance of a stable homeland and also the importance of even your homeland having some power projection just for the sake of meeting the bottom line. And well, but as it stands now, America's pursuit of power abroad, pursuit of power projection, comes at the expense of me. I made this point an episode or two ago where a lot of my positions about American foreign policy do come down to what's this going to do to the gas prices, and from what I've noticed, they go up. They've gone down a little over the past year, something I will give Trump a modicum of credit on, but America's imperial pursuits usually lead to a rise in the cost of living for me and for everyone else. It's just that simple.
Yeah.
When,
Now, if just to focus for a short time on the Mark Carney speech, because there's a
Please do.
paradox about it. So we've discussed that the European leaders, we said this last year when Trump was threatening Greenland, that he would over ask to get basically what he wanted, which is bases for free and, sovereign American territory on Greenland, which is what happened, which is what we predicted would happen. But, Carney's, and that the European leaders would acquiesce after putting up a bit of a resistance. Of course, they sent troops. The Americans already have 150 troops in Greenland to begin with, and I think the Europeans in total sent something like 54, roughly speaking. Anyways, so Mark Carney's speech at Davos, this was kind of interesting because he was basically quoting. I mean, he admitted later, but he did the little speech that Václav Havel did way back when the Soviet Union fell apart. And that is, how did it fall apart? Well, it was based on a lie. The grocer would put up a sign, and he foreshadowed his speech, which he later explained, that the sign has been taken down, and that is the sign that the grocer put up was "Workers of the World Unite," and one day he doesn't put up the sign anymore, and eventually everybody gets the message that it's done. It's over. No need to pretend. And Mark Carney's speech was essentially saying that the post-World War II consensus, and this will probably include Bretton Woods and then later the petrodollar that Nixon introduced, that this order essentially wasn't what it advertised itself to be. Now, he doesn't say it was a total lie, which some people have characterized, but that that many times, or part of the time, it did not live up to what it said it was, that it didn't live up to its stated values and aspirations. And that, now, Carney got a standing ovation for this. And that, that era, he said, it's totally over. That era is over. And I think he's talking about not just Trump, but possibly what every American president from this point on will do in order to preserve American hegemony. Right? And you can see with Trump, I think this is also tied in with the protests that are happening in Minnesota. He's very willing to escalate the situation there. A lot of these guys are not well trained, but he's not backing down. This is kind of like kidnapping Maduro and getting Denmark to, flounder on Greenland, when it could all have been just a written agreement. Yeah, you can put your bases back, whatever. He's there trying to project strength, right? And what Carney is saying essentially is America is squandering its reputation. And I'm adding on to that, much like Israel has. And it was, but it was this soft power which has always been basically what young people in countries that are adversarial to America have depended on. That America ultimately was more moral. Now, there's many examples where that's simply not true over the last century or so. Um, but now they've squandered. They've made it less. Um, they've it's not so foggy. It's very clear. It's more transparent now what it is that the American empire is doing, and that's what I think Carney is talking about. But here's the conundrum: where is Carney going to find the support? Right? Like, yes, the liberals and what Black Horse calls the Laurentian elite of Canada in the East, who are mostly like the English in southern Quebec. Okay, the Laurentians is a little mountain range with lots of ski resorts and everything. It's very pretty. It's very picturesque there. Essentially, they want to be able to negotiate with China for trade agreements in order to counteract the U.S. But 80% of trade with of Canada's trade is with the U.S., which is an extraordinary amount, far more than, let's say, what Ukraine and Russia had before 2014. And the other thing is, of course, is yes, while China is buying all this gold and is moving away, it's not jettisoning the treasuries at. It is doing that, but not at the pace you might expect. It's faring. Their economy did better than America's after the tariff wars of 2025. Uh, that's it. I think pretty clear based on what I've read. But what? So, how far is this going to go? Is what Mark Carney is doing kayfabe? Is it a desperate thing? Will it inspire the Europeans? I think the Europeans. I think some countries are genuinely interested in doing this. Now, you take the UK for example. Starmer is going in February to China, and Trump is going shortly after him. I believe in March or April. So we'll have to see what happens after these visits. I would count on Trump being like a spoiler for whatever is established, if something is established on a positive note between Starmer and Xi Jinping, right? I think I don't know if some of these fears in the European public and lower level politicians is percolating to the top, to the elites in Europe or not. They certainly voice concern, but where do their allegiances really lie? And this is what I mean about the speech that Carney gave. It is a flex. It is a flex, and his approval is very high. Now, of course, a lot of people are waiting for Trump to leave office. They're just saying 2.5 years, and we're gonna go back to normalcy. We just have to wait it out. They've all tried this approach, but I think you and I were talking about how Trump was the shoe-in to win. If he didn't get assassinated in 2024, because the media wasn't organizing against him. What we saw in his first term wasn't happening, and even the L.A. you know riots that happened now seem very distant. People remember the George Floyd riots much better than what happened last year in the spring of 2025. Again, the flashpoint, the building of the anti-Trump narrative is already established. We'll see where it goes. Now, I was talking with a friend. Where how far can it go? Well, if America has to project externally, it cannot have a population that's too divided internally. But you notice how the liberals are, they seem at a loss. You check out their comments on Instagram, and they're basically arguing about we were right about wearing masks. Like, you think this carries any weight? You know what I mean? It's
Yes,
so
yes.
desperate. Like, they there's something about the situation where they can't get the sloganeering right. So they're using past victories, which then turned into defeats, as a rallying point. Um, make of that what you will. I'm not so sure. Well, and I think Trump is betting on this, that they're going to fail. They're not going to succeed in, let's say, dethroning him. But again, we have to wait till the midterms. We have to wait till the midterms, and some people speculate that Trump is going to ask for a third term. How? I mean, he's already losing it. He's already beginning to look senile at times. Kind of like Biden shortly after Trump won his first term. I don't know.
And I'll talk about some of the Minnesota stuff towards the end of the show, but I do think it ties in to everything you're saying. But I think it's interesting what you brought up with Carney, where they're more or less him and some aspects of the European elite, some segments of the European elite, are playing, I guess you could say, playing coy with China to get one over on Trump. And like I was saying, from the Chinese perspective, I think they do have to realize what is being done here, and they have to realize what this segment of the Western elite are trying to do to them, and that much
Like
like
Carney could be calling his bluff, is what I'm saying.
yes, I agree, I agree. Um, but what I do think is interesting is looking at a potential scenario, and this could even come after both Carney and Trump, but just far into the future. You do see ever so subtly the seeds of Western separatism being sown in Canada, where I do think, and like I said, this might be too much projection in the future, that there are backstops being created in the event of, let's just say, some quote unquote Canadian revolt against American hegemony. And I think Alberta, particularly, is where you see that in the most obvious sense. But I do think that there are, let's just say, contingency plans vis-a-vis Canada and vis-a-vis NATO as a whole. Honestly, looking at uh, this scenario with Greenland, surely these are not the only countries that the Americans have designs against. I mean, let's keep in mind, I think it's been since the early 2000s where the Americans have a caveat where they can use military force to extract any American held by the ICC, which they also extended to Israelis held by the ICC as well. And when it comes down to the wire, they're going to take those actions. I'm not saying that's what this is leading up to, but it does show the defining lines of the empire and the relationship between Washington and its client states.
Yeah.
But with that being said, I suppose moving on from the European news in Davos and the nonsense there, we can talk a little bit about some of the events or non events in the Middle East. And I would say the first order of business on that is that it appeared Friday night as if all signs pointed to an attack on Iran. And this is the second scare we've had just in the past month here with the Iranians. Last show we did, there was that build up where it looked like there was going to be a strike in Iran, but there was a last minute pullout by the U.S.'s decision, by Trump's decision. And it looks like that had happened again. You had Friday night several airlines were suspending flights to both Iran and Israel and preparing for the worst. The Pentagon pizza meter, of course, was going off the charts, as it does when there's usually some sort of impending American action. We've seen this for decades now, especially with the internet. It's easier to track these things. And it was understood last time that part of the reason Trump did not proceed forward with the strikes on Iran was at the urging of both the Gulf states and to a lesser extent Turkey, where they were imploring Trump not to take any further military action. And probably between that and a number of different reasons, the U.S. held off. And it looks like something similar to that has happened this time. And over these past two times, you actually have seen a loose framework form between Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Pakistan that I don't think could have formed any other time except within the past few years, that cautions against attacks or really any sort of escalation in the Middle East by a U.S.-Israeli action. And that these countries, even though they all have traditionally very strong ties with the U.S., are in a bit of a revolt themselves. And now, these are countries, especially the Turks, that are well known for playing both sides or all sides of these conflicts. And now, with this on and off again scenario with Iran, you have Witkoff laying out U.S. demands to Iran in order to reach an agreement. Because the charade, the facade of negotiations with Iran, apparently still continues. And for those of you curious enough, it's stop enriching uranium, reduce missile stockpiles, reduced to approximately 200 kilograms of enriched nuclear material, anywhere from 3.67 to 60%, and of course stop the support of regional proxies. And that is all with the promise of an ending of sanctions and a return to the quote-unquote international community dangled right in front of them. At a time when it seems like the protests in Iran still do continue, but have reached their peak and are starting to fade out, as at least from what I've seen. And
yeah, I think they fade out quite a bit because they've reinstated the internet.
yes, and that was one of the big reasons, the complete information cutoff, which there were talks about Iran creating an intranet similar to, say, what you have in China without a VPN, where it's a completely internalized system. But it seems for now the protests have mostly subsided in Iran, which I do think is ultimately a good thing, that some stability is being restored. And that because of that, military action both becomes simultaneously more and less likely, because when there are the protests, there is the sense that if we just give these people the momentum, we can get our guys in power, etc. That's one school of thought. The other school of thought is if there's these protests and we launch an attack, it's going to rally the population behind the government, and that they're going to put aside a number of these secondary issues for the sake of national unity, which we did see during the 12-Day War, by the way. That is one of those things that did happen during the 12-Day War. But ultimately, everyone stayed their hand. And that is because, just getting down to the reality of the situation, the Americans at this point are not capable of a decisive military action against Iran that would accomplish its goals with minimum American casualties and minimum American costs. That is simply out of the question. And that has arguably never been an option, but whatever hope that existed, say, in the late 90s or early 2000s, that is completely gone. In which case, we continue to climb up the escalation ladder, because as it stands now, Israel, particularly the government in power in Israel now, wants regime change in Iran by any means necessary. They're going to lean on their connections in Washington, which are very many and very deep, to make that happen. But their level and number of connections is not going to be enough to change material reality. That no matter how many senators or White House officials or whoever they might have the ear of in the U.S., that's not going to change the fortress that Iran has created for itself in the region. And the only way that's going to get dislodged is a Western coalition war against Iran, which is an outcome that nobody seems to be willing to take up for very sane reasons, honestly. Nobody in America wants to do it, nobody in Europe wants to do it, because they understand the level of commitment that it would take to dislodge the current Iranian government and install a new one, even without the nation building aspects, even if it were an immediate withdrawal after the overthrow of the Iranian government. That would still be an immense amount of effort, an immense amount of treasure spent, an immense amount of blood spilled that nobody wants to commit to. And like I said, I don't blame them for that at all. Nobody wants to bear those costs, which, with all that being said, makes me fear the possibility of particularly Israel using a nuclear weapon or some other act of similar magnitude. I don't think the Americans would be the ones to launch the tactical nuke. They could be. Who knows? But the more America stays military action, the more risk of Israelis' drastic action. So it's going to come down to the wire, and I do think, I'm not putting a time frame on it, but it's going to be one or the other. Either the Americans will set forth to pursue regime change in Iran, or the Israelis will start breaking out the figurative and literal nuclear options.
Yeah, yeah. They like again, they've squandered their image. Uh, Look, they've killed over 430 Palestinians since the so-called ceasefire. Right? Um, Today, they drop bunker busters in southern Lebanon. Like, nobody is attacking Israel, right? And everybody understands that Israel going after Iran is, and you can see for the first time, leftoids in 2025 started posting, the greater Israeli project. I only saw right wingers, and I've been in right wing circles since 2010. Not once have I ever seen a liberal or a left winger post that, but they are now. And so it's kind of like mask off, and I think they're thinking like we either do it now or we don't get another chance.
That's
And
yeah, that's what it comes down to.
right. So you have like stupid countries, another Anglo country that's like completely subjugated by this Middle Eastern tribe who like, two Pakistani guys kill 14 or 15 Jews on a beach, and like they post pictures of like white nationalists and new anti-Semitic laws, and you can't, potentially there's a law that I mean, it's not passed, but they're even thinking of drafting things like you can't criticize Benjamin Netanyahu. It's like, are you people insane? Like, how much more ass kissing are you going to do? So, anyways, I mean, even I forget his name. Some Jewish representative from the UK said it's not safe for Jews to live in the UK anymore, and Trump is like, it's so ridiculous. I've never seen I've never seen such Jewish cuck leaders in my life. Yeah, this was on the Telegraph. U.S. considering asylum for British Jews.
But not
Yeah,
for
Robert Garson, seen in the middle of the picture in the oval. Yeah, yeah. This is
at the same time, we have how many empty promises to the Boers of South Africa? How many of them have actually
yeah.
come to the United States? How many Ukrainians are we threatening to deport at the point? Something like 240,000. I know that goes back and forth. And despite my
Okay.
stance on the war,
Honestly, how they use these people for over half a century, and now it's shameless. It's shameless.
It is.
They will always betray Europeans for Jews. Like that's what everyone will remember about this country.
And I want to say this because you brought up the thing about Australia, especially in light of current U.S. EU at least public dispute, U.S. Europe public dispute, and even how that filters down to the individual level. There's a reason where, as much as I have problems with what happens in continental Europe, I will never criticize it over the Anglosphere, because the Anglosphere, no matter what's happening in continental Europe, it's going to be worse than the Anglosphere, just as a general rule. And I have only ever seen very few exceptions to that over the past decade or so. I've been paying attention to politics, whether it's demographics, whether it's even speech issues at this point, because as we know in America, the First Amendment is effectively dead. When it comes to any number of these issues, no matter what problems Germany or Sweden or France might have, which are great problems, don't get me wrong, they have a great number of problems. They're both numerically more and more intense in any Anglosphere country at any given time. And I'm not saying that to gloat, I'm not saying that to brag. I hate the fact that that is the scenario, that any of these countries had to put up with these issues. But there's a reason why I have tried to stay my criticisms against continental Europe for as long as I have. And it comes down to that. Where what continental European country is going to gulag you for criticizing Benjamin Netanyahu? I can't think of one. And these are countries with Holocaust denial laws in the books. And even then, you are still subject to more scrutiny, I think, in Anglosphere countries, including America. Maybe not so much in the legal sense in America, but certainly in the social sense. And you also look at a lot of these anti-BDS bills that go around several state legislatures. That's more draconian than anything the European Union has put forth, which is a very high bar. Don't get me wrong. And like I said, I hate to say it. I hate this scenario, but that's what we keep looking at time and time again. But speaking of American allies getting thrown under the bus, you want to talk about Syria and the Kurds?
Yes, it should be mentioned that I mean, I'm sure you're going to bring up the fighting between the Kurds and the reformed Al Qaeda ISIS branch of
the moderate rebels,
the moderate beheaders. I mean, they slaughtered literally a group of like dozens and dozens of Kurds that were holed up in a hospital in Aleppo. And I mean, in many ways, the Kurds are idiots. They had these maximalist demands, not unlike the Ukrainians. But I would argue the Ukrainians are in a better position than even the Kurds.
without question.
For maximalist demands. But yeah, they thought like, oh yeah, well, we can't be betrayed a third time. I mean, even the Iranians were bombing them on their border because some of them were agitating in it. So they have this fantasy of having Kurdistan stretch all the way from Iran, Iraq, Syria, and into Turkey, right? And they've only been used as stupid pawns for like the Americans and the Israelis to get what they want at whatever time.
Literally selling Syrian and Iraqi oil to Israel.
Yeah. These people, like, I don't know, how are they not humiliated? How do they not feel their sense of their own humiliation? But they had maximalist demands, and if they had worked with Assad, they would have had this autonomous, semi-autonomous territory. The Americans would not have gone to war with the Russians over that area. But because they chose to work with the Americans, they thought they had one over everybody. And now these idiots are getting slaughtered. Now, don't get me wrong, they're slaughtering Christians, obviously, right? Because America almost always sides with who's ever slaughtering Christians. And I'm not just talking about Israel, but anyways.
Yeah, I mean, the Kurds, they were no friend of the local Christians. In fact, many of the villages and neighborhoods they occupy in northeastern Syria.
They kicked out
Yes.
the Christians and the Muslims, or the Arabs first.
Yeah, the Arabs and then the remnant Assyrian populations as well.
Yes, yes. Which we talked about way back when the war was raging there. Anyways, so yeah, do go on, because it also looks like the Russians are leaving their base.
Yeah, I
one
mean,
of their two bases.
Jelani did it. He is the
He's
golden
handsome.
boy of
Trump said so.
of the American Empire. Trump gave him the Sultan's blessing to do this. And I recall 2019 when Trump was mulling over the withdrawal from Syria. It was Trump betrayed the Kurds. Trump betrayed the Kurds, even to the point where like Pat Robertson, that one televangelist, was saying that Trump had lost the mandate of heaven because he betrayed the Kurds. Funny enough, he ended up losing power from 2021 to 2025, so I guess he was right in a sense, but maybe not quite for quite the reasons that he thought. And it also does crack me up because this is one of the places where a lot of the more violent left-wing elements in the West really cut their teeth on use of violence, because you had a lot of international volunteers fighting with the Kurds during the ISIS war. And that has created a network like where a lot of like official Antifa groups had contingents there. And of course, these people have never been prosecuted because they're on the right side of it. The best way to oppose American imperialism is to act for American imperial proxies. The wonderful principled leftist Noam Chomsky, also very pro-Kurdish. All the usual suspects, all the people you would ever expect.
Very pro-Kurdish, eh?
Yeah, it's... And, like I said, I don't condone wanton slaughter of anyone. I've been very clear about that over my time doing this program. But you are right. They snubbed Assad at every negotiation. All the way back in 2018, they snubbed Assad at negotiations. You have the Turks moving to Afrin in northwestern Syria, excuse me. And every time they would snub Assad, sit on his oil, sit on his country's wheat, sit on the lifeblood of the economy, really, as Syria continues to suffer under sanctions, under blockades, under economic warfare. The reason why Assad could only pay his soldiers $6 USD a month after a certain point, while the Turks could pay their guys, $1,500 a month. That was because the Kurds being complicit in the occupation of these resources and really just selling them for scraps. And look, they delivered. In large part, they delivered this nation into the hands of Jelani. Of course, at the behest of their overlords, at the behest of their sponsors. Let's not kid ourselves with that. But ultimately, as far as Kurdish political organization is concerned, this is the price that they pay. And look, the Americans didn't do them any favors when they said they would protect them from Saddam Hussein, despite the fact that they had really no intention of enforcing that, even though in the 90s you had this de facto Kurdish state in Iraq become a hub of jihadism, because Saddam, even though the U.S. never really followed through on the threat, Saddam didn't dare act in northern Iraq because of the fear of U.S. threats. But it's this network. It's this same cycle over and over and over again. And then the Kurds in Iran expect the same support, where they're going to be at the forefront of revolution, and the Americans are definitely going to back this. They are. I hate to say it, but it's another fell for it again award. What more were these people expecting? What did they think was going to happen at the end of this? Jolani did what Assad could, and I hate to say it, united Syria, drove the Russians out. Because
Well, I mean, after asking them to stay, I wonder, because everybody wanted them to stay.
yes,
Turkey, Jelani,
even Israel. Yeah.
even Israel asked them to stay. The Christians, the Alawites, asked them to stay. All I can think of is there's one country that didn't want them to stay, and that's America.
Yeah. And
Now they can kill more Christians, right?
yeah, and Putin, in one of his many shortcomings, is very acquiescent to Trump. He seems to take Trump at good faith, despite the fact that there was a literal assassination attempt against him by Trump. Which,
Yeah.
make what sense of that you will. Even now, he still puts out these like half-hearted statements, or as the foreign minister, he put out these half-hearted statements like, great dialogue with our U.S. partners, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And yeah, that's one of his big blind spots. And if there's going to be any downfall of Putin, it's going to be that. And it looks like, if I had to guess, you're correct that the withdrawal from Syria, to the extent that's happening by the Russians, was at an American request or American demand. And now, as it stands, Syria is a U.S.-Turkish proxy that occasionally gives some concessions to Israel while also being on extremely hostile footing with them. It's kind of a complex relationship.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it will be interesting, because I know that thus far American quote-unquote efforts have prevented conflict between Turkey and Israel, but how long can these ramshackle peace agreements really last before Syria does become that battleground between the two? And how much is Turkey willing to risk? How much do they think they can squeeze out of the U.S. in order to go against Israel? Like, how much do they think they can push their luck against Israel when it comes to the U.S.? And I think that they will find it's not very far, while simultaneously really playing both sides of the Iran issue, where they're making statements condemning any intervention in Iran, but also looking at their interests in Central Asia.
But they also work with Iran to target Kurds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, like I said, they're very duplicitous in their relationship with the Iranians and the Arabs as well. And this is old hat for them, especially Erdogan. He's not the only one. It sort of is the position that Turkey's in, but he really embodies it to a T. And I've said this off air, I've said this on air, I've said it before, I'll say it again. Looking at that region, the major poles of power are Persians, Turks, Arabs, and Jews. And let me tell you, 10 times out of 10, the most reasonable people you can speak to out of that group are the Persians.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's the one group that we refuse to engage in genuine dialogue with. It's beyond me. I mean, I know why. But
Yeah.
it's beyond
we all
any
know why.
rationality.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm pretty sad state of affairs when the Persian is the most reasonable one in the room. But I digress. I mean, but we knew this was going to happen. We knew that Syria would collapse into civil war once again. On that same note, you had the emptying of prisons with former ISIS fighters who were waving ISIS flags once again in Syria several years after their supposed defeat, because as part of this new mission against the Kurds, Giuliani emptied out the jails and sent them on their
That's
merry
right.
way.
At least 2 separate jails, hundreds and hundreds of them.
And I'm sure that these people are going to be very loyal to Giuliani. Their loyalties have always been very solid in the past. They don't change factions with, like, the wind changes. They don't form splinter groups every other week. I'm sure Syria is on the way for a paragon of stability and democracy and human rights, as we all dreamed would happen when Assad fell. And some people could say, and I don't even think Assad necessarily left of his own volition, but some people could say Assad was a coward for abandoning Syria. But looking at him vis-a-vis how the country's acting like right now, I don't blame him one bit. I don't
No,
even.
I don't either.
No, I don't even think it's in the scenario where a captain should have gone down with his ship, because look at the ship he was captaining, and in which case,
Yeah.
in that case, I think it is. Can you fault the man for up and leaving all of that and not standing his ground? I cannot. Like, it's after years of the Kurds stringing you along in negotiations, only for this to happen. I mean, he has to feel like the most vindicated man in the world, just returning to his practice as an eye doctor. Like, it really is that. And I'm sure he's having fun as gamer. You know, he has the Steam profile that was allegedly his. And, yeah, like, I'm sure he's taking a well-deserved rest after dealing with this circus for who knows how long.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even know how much of that stuff is true. I mean, it is funny stuff, you know.
Yeah. But point being is he's certainly leading a much calmer life, regardless of whether he's a gamer or not. That he's actually doing what he always wanted to do, just returning back to his medical practice. And look, I'm not saying his rule is perfect. I think in many ways he foolishly sowed the own seeds of his destruction with putting too much trust in the Turks and the Arab League, with the purging of many of his father's government officials when he came into power. But ultimately, he gave that country 24 years of his life. He gave that country his entire adult life, effectively, trying to keep it together, trying to keep it from being partitioned and pieced apart and overrun by Israel and jihadists, and this is how it ended.
Literally the worst people.
Yeah, but literally the worst people, distinction without a difference between any of these people. But that is, I guess, really all the Middle Eastern news I had.
Yeah, same with me.
The Board of Peace. How could I forget?
The Board of Peace.
Yeah, the namesake of this episode.
How could I forget?
So let me put up a map of the countries that have been invited to the Board of Peace with the $1 billion buy-in. It's a diverse coalition. The one I do appreciate is that Lukashenko, he sent him a letter with his name spelled the very, like, gobbledygook Belarusian way, where it's like Alexander, like, Lukashenko. It was funny. But all these countries highlighted in red are countries that have been invited. And so far, a list of 22 countries that have accepted have been Saudi Arabia, Qatar, UAE, Argentina, Paraguay, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Bahrain, Bulgaria, Hungary, Indonesia, Jordan, Kazakhstan, Kosovo, Morocco, Mongolia, Pakistan, Turkey, and Uzbekistan. Now, to be a voting member in the Board of Peace, you have to have the $1 billion buy-in. Putin said he'd be willing to, but you had to release the frozen assets and take his $1 billion from there in order for his buy-in.
Yeah, didn't Putin say, "Yeah, I'll join. You can take $1 million from my frozen assets"?
Yeah, that's exactly what it was.
Yeah.
And then,
That's
according to it, Trump is the head of the Board of Peace for life until he either steps down or dies. They have, I think, like a 3-year window.
Unbelievable sham. The money is literally going to him.
Yeah, and it's like a 3-year window.
It's worse than his crypto bullshit.
A 3-year window to find a successor, in which case, if the majority cannot agree on a successor, the board is just automatically dissolved, according to its own, like, articles. Where this is just Trump. He's just dancing for donations. He's just grifting to the highest tier. He is just, once again, he's become an Indian scammer. Between the Putin thing, between this, not only has he had a relationship with Bill Clinton allegedly, not only is he an Ottoman sultan,
he's literally gay.
he is also an Indian scammer now. Because it's the $1 billion buy-in going right into Trump's pocket. And some people have said, oh, is this a supplanting of the UN? No, it's not. This, like I said, this is just a Trump family money-making scheme that will probably dissolve when either Trump steps down or dies. And the money's going to go to him. It's going to go to his state. It's going to go to his family. And there's not going to be any peace or anything of the sort really achieved. What's the point of this? But speaking of peace and lack thereof, I suppose we should talk about phase 2 of the Venezuela option with the walls closing in on Cuba.
Yes.
Where it does seem like this is...
Dangerous Cuba. Watching America like a spider.
Yeah.
For so many years.
We could open up relations with China. We could have several summits with the Soviet Union. Donald Trump could literally walk into North Korean territory. But rapprochement with Cuba is too far.
Yeah.
What did Cuba do? Like rabbi jokes? Like what's got him so upset?
Well, didn't Castro have gulags for gay people at one point?
Yeah, I think so. Like,
So he could be just deeply offended by
and
that.
Trump does want gay marriage legal
In
in every
Botswana,
country, in and especially Botswana,
yes.
especially Botswana.
His
What a
2019 State
guy!
of the Union, by the way, gay relations decriminalized in every country. That was a goal set forth in the 2019 State of the Union.
My God, he is so based.
Richard Grenell is smuggling gays and lesbians out of Iran as we speak. But also ICE is deporting gay Iranians, so it's becoming like an infinite like money loop where Grenell brings them over, they get deported, and then Grenell brings them back over. And then I'm sure they launder money through some NGO. All allegedly. I'm not making any accusations. I'm not making any statements that could be assumed to be slander or whatever. All the caveats that will keep me out of trouble. I'll just say that much.
Yeah.
But of course, this is because Rubio has Trump's ear, and Rubio has an axe to grind because of his family, because they're Cuban exiles, because they were part of. I won't necessarily say they were part of the old elite, but they had ties to the old elite, especially through extended family and through family by marriage. And they were dispossessed. And still, almost over 60 years later, they're continuing this struggle to, quote unquote, liberate Cuba from what Castro style authoritarianism versus Batista gangster style authoritarianism, where they just let organized crime syndicates run the island, versus an overbearing centralized state. I don't see much of a difference, really. In fact,
Yeah.
like I said, I've had my problems with doctrinal communism that I've laid out probably for several hours collectively on this show. But I do think there might actually be more recourse in a centralized state than whatever clown show Batista was running, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, I mean, for some countries, America really is magic, and for like for some people, but for the Kurds, it isn't. But for the exiled Cubans, America really is magic.
Oh yeah, I mean the exiled Cubans got a sweet deal because after the Bay of Pigs failed, they all got swept from the CIA. They all got to start cartels and have like it. It was a sweet gig, and even going back, Rubio's extended family were also tied into that. His brother-in-law, what was his name? I think it was something Cecilia. I can't remember his first name, but he allegedly had ties to some of the drug peddling operations that were connected to American intelligence. Shocker. When it came to this.
Probably the Jewish mafia was upset.
Oh yeah, I mean that's without question. And
The poor Jewish mafia.
nobody ever thinks about them.
Stupid Castro.
But
Hate communists.
I mean, as it stands now, I mean, Cuba at its height actually had some power projection where they could send mercenaries, they could send resources and supplies. Or, like, for example, they were very involved in the Angolan War. They actually had the special forces intelligence capabilities. Of course, in conjunction with other communist countries at the time, primarily the Soviets. But they actually had the ability to project power in Latin America and Africa. But that Cuba has not existed since 1991. That Cuba actually has distanced itself from the Russian Federation, and even to a lesser extent from China, where it wanted to pursue like some quote unquote like independent communism, independent socialism, whatever guy who was in power after the Castro brothers both either stepped down or died. And they worked themselves in this weird position where it was like this like we're still like a revolutionary state, but we're going to be a little more libtarded about it, and they let themselves completely isolated. Sure, they still have some back channels to Russia and China, but ultimately the walls are closing in on Cuba because they decided they wanted to do this bizarre third way politics of, I don't know, say somebody like Tito in a world of American unipolarity. And I mean, look, I not that the situation in Cuba is great right now, but I can't imagine there's any designs to say improve the situation, much like Venezuela, where it's just going to be a. It's just,
I just thought of like A way I would describe this situation, like Maduro, Cuba, Greenland, threatening Canada. Trump enters a wrestling rink, a wrestling match. Right, he goes inside the rink, and it's four midgets. And he's pounding these, he's pounding these midgets, and all the MAGA people are people who still support him. I mean, I think MAGA was boom and bust, but like his supporters are going, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it really is just like it's like Trump versus four midgets in a trench coat. That's what it feels like, and they act like this is the same thing as him, like going like toe to toe with the Russians and the Chinese, like actual great powers with their own degree of power projection, or even going toe to toe with the Iranians, who themselves are a formidable regional power. But it's just Trump, just I don't know, like kicking around two dysfunctional Latin American countries and then two ice blocks. That's That's what it feels like because once again, America has to lick its wounds after not being able to take sufficient action in the Middle East, and also the humiliation in Ukraine, where it needs to solve these old Latin American grievances that nobody, I would say, under the age of 50 really can remember why they exist or even care about at this point. And what few Trump loyalists are left will lap it up because it's the greatest thing ever because Trump is doing it. Trump will, and I'm sure Trump also wants to be the legacy of the guy who did what Kennedy couldn't, who did what all successive administrations couldn't, and he's the one who overthrew Cuba, despite the fact that Fidel Castro has been dead and buried for 10 years. His brother's been out of power for like another 8 years on top of that, and whatever like successor from even the revolutionary days is there is a no name, and that Cuba has been, like I said, effectively isolated itself from Russia and China post Cold War, and it's just it's knocking over.
It's comical.
It is. It is.
It's comedy. It's just comedy at this point.
Yeah. Trump is like kicking down the rotten structure, acting like he was the one who like meticulously planned on how to dismantle the Cuban regime. No, it's and of course Rubio relishes in it, like I said, because of his own ethnic interests and because of his own family ties and how far that goes back and all the networks he's tied into. But it is just comical. And like I said, while I categorically oppose regime change, much like Venezuela, Cuba, when regime change eventually comes, because I do think it is a matter of when, I'm probably not going to lose that much sleep over it. It's not like confronting Iran or Russia, where something that might actually have cascading effects globally that even make their way home. Now, of course, it will increase migration, but that's a given at this point. I don't think that. And I think the one foot policy for Cuba is still in place, and that they're the exception. Sure, we've sealed the border with Mexico, but we've also probably are going to make up with that in the next 3 years with people from other parts of Latin America and other parts of the world, and of course our quote unquote legal immigration system, our visa system, where that's going to possibly offset a lot of the admitted progress that may have been made in terms of slowing the immigration flow. It's just trading one for another, similar to Brexit, where you don't get Poles and Romanians anymore, you get Indians and Pakistanis.
Yeah.
I mean, but look, I hope I'm wrong about all this. I hope
You're
that
not. Stop hoping.
I know I'm not. Yeah, and as much as I want to believe that there's some great immigration restrictions push, all we're getting is TikTok videos of deportations that only end up in federal agent violence against white protesters, who I'm not saying are entirely innocent in their own right. But it is downstream from BLM, the fact that the two people who have been liquidated by ICE have not been minorities. Let me just put it that way, because the optics of ICE having done that to, say, a black or Hispanic person, that would be like the riots going on now. That those pale in comparison to what would happen there. But because you have these people, like I said, there's multiple angles you can look at this, both figuratively and literally, and I'm getting into the Minnesota thing right now. But you'll notice I don't think it's coincidental that these federal agents are willing to use more brute force against white people than even like the non-white people they're supposed to be deporting.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I mean he's not going to go to all the the Republican states where there's all those farm hands.
Yeah, you're not going to go to Texas or Arizona or New Mexico where
Yeah.
you have like these.
Which, I mean, and it is part of the culture war, right? Like he does want revenge for 2020, and if he backs off now, he's finished, right? And I think he does now have support of a lot of the military. Mike Milley is not there anymore. And I think that's part of the reason I discussed earlier why the liberals, the Democrats in America, still seem so flat-footed and are unable to. I mean, he's a real threat now, much more than he was in 2016. But they seem more disheveled, more disorganized, and that's probably because the media is not. I don't see signs that the media is on their side the way it was from his first term and then the first couple of years of Biden's term. That's what it depends upon. I mean, because these idiots will literally believe that they spoke truth to power, and the media thought, yeah, we have to show this. They presume that much honesty and good faith from the media. It boggles my mind, right? But yeah, do go on.
I mean, but it's just a rinse and repeat of the last case right now because they.
Yeah.
I mean, if I didn't know any better, they go to like the most Podunk County Sheriff's Department they find, and they say who's the lowest IQ guy on the force, and they're like, oh, it's him over there, and they give him a badge to be a federal agent, and then they send him after a month of training into what is admittedly very politically hostile territory where the local authorities in Minnesota are not going to cooperate with the federal agents.
Right, and I love how these guys dress. Half of them are so overweight, and the flak jackets that they're getting from an army surplus store don't even fit them properly.
Yeah, I mean, like all the equipment that police departments can buy from the Pentagon, and these guys have to go down to the local Army Navy store to get kitted out. That's what it feels like.
I know.
And
we shouldn't laugh because it is kind of tragic. Like that guy that they recently killed. What was it yesterday? He was a nurse.
yeah,
He never pulled out the gun on them, right? He had it in a holster, which is technically legal, and that hasn't escaped the notice of the shitlibs. Now, again, they should never have shot him. Honestly, they should never have shot him. But I don't care to get involved in that argument whether they should have or had they. I hate that kind of stupid legalism. This is a geopolitical show, not some slop show.
yeah, I'm not here to give you a beat by beat of the most recent
But they fired 9 shots into this guy, and 3 of them were in his back. Like they could easily have subdued. No, they decided to do this. Somebody has given them the go ahead to ramp things up, and I never believed that notion that Trump was going to run for a 3rd term. I still don't. But man, I'm starting to think. Like maybe some of these people are right.
Yeah,
and they're not just being sensationalists.
It's kind of like how I feel about the new Israel thing in Ukraine, where I don't believe it, but every time you look, there's something else that supports it.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like I give Putin I don't give Putin a lot of credit. I don't. I don't know what kind of disappointments he's capable of. He's capable of many.
I mean, they're called Minsk 1 and Minsk 2 for starters, but like we've seen where that results in. And even like I said, the immigration situation in Russia, it's very up in the air. I wouldn't say it's good by any means. I know there has been a
But
ramp
it's
up.
not America's situation. It's not
No.
Europe's or Britain's. Now, ironically, Starmer has reduced migration into Britain.
Are you kidding me?
Better, yes, 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 much better than Cameron or Liz Truss or Sunak or any of these clowns. Not that Starmer isn't a clown; he's a clown. But like, my friend was asking about that. I said, "You don't understand, right? Like, when Obama and Starmer and other liberals deport people, the reason you don't hear it in the news is because they are actually one step closer to the power. When a Republican or a conservative does that, right, it can be used as a moral argument against them. Remember, you're dealing with millions of people who have like sacks of hammers for brains. They forget easily. They're tied to their, their moral positions, and they all have a vague and untenable kind of utopia that's around the corner if they can
They're not
galvanize
pessimistic
the
enough.
vote. They're really not pessimistic enough, and that's what stops them from seeing clearly or having a decent memory, short-term memory. So, like, now one of the things that happened in Russia and have been happening for a while now, that I've noticed is they have right-wing groups that accompany the FSB officers, and they literally like these guys scope out and say, okay, there's a ton of these migrants from Tajikistan. They're over here. One of the interesting posts from someone who is in Russia are the two guys from Russians with Attitude, and that is, he said, they're just not afraid to name them anymore. It used to be up until a couple of years ago that you didn't name necessarily the origin, the ethnic group that the migrants or the people involved with migration came from.
But after
And
Crocus, I
now,
think that's out the window.
After,
After
yeah, the war is too serious. That's done. That's done. That's over. And if you support it, you're going to be named too. And they don't care. Apparently, TV, newspapers, so forth and so forth, are naming them. But of course, I don't mean the people with little hats. Maybe they are. Maybe they're not. I think he's talking about the migrants themselves, but also willing to name, because the Russians will be able to see if the name is, small hat or not.
oh, of course, they can discern that. But another interesting thing, speaking of deportations, effectively, what country did over 1 million deportations in the course of a month last year?
No.
Iran, after the 12-day war.
Oh yes, that's right. A lot of Pajis were told.
Yeah, a lot of them and a lot of Afghans. And even Pakistan
Yes.
deported like something upwards of 1 million of Afghans back when they had their border disputes as well.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it shows that
No
if you
fooling around.
have a state apparatus willing to commit to it, it can be done. But as it stands now, Trump does not have that state apparatus, so he's settling
No.
for the TikTok edit. So that's why he's
Yes.
sending them into Minnesota so
Very
he
good
can
point.
thumb his nose at Tim Walz and the Democrats and say, ha ha ha, we're deporting you. When I'll tell you this much. When it comes to illegal Somali migrants, especially with the case that got involved, all you have to do is you have to throttle the welfare, and they go. When it comes to a lot of the migrants from Latin America, those are people who are, to put it bluntly, scab labor. They're working on the farms, they're working in the warehouses, in which case, that's when you clear those out. You get those guys out of there. You nail the employers with whatever penalties you can to the fullest extent of the law. That's how you get the deportation numbers that you want. But the Republicans will never go against their Chamber of Commerce buddies. It's just too politically unviable. So they'll spend their time prancing around Minnesota, sending in these idiots who have no business in law enforcement to conduct these very quiet operations. And I can almost guarantee you, I have not seen anything that would support this, but I would not be shocked if you get these morons who, like the Reddit battalions in Ukraine, probably post something online saying, like, I'm a based ICE agent and we're going to, do a raid at so-and-so and you should come see it because it's so cool. Like, I bet OPSEC among the new ICE recruits is atrocious. I don't have any concrete evidence, but I'd be willing to bet a significant amount of money if I were a gambler that ICE OPSEC is probably non-existent. Which also sucks for the the competent agents, because they're the ones who are going to get swept up in this, and we're also going to get to a point where, if this violence continues, that a lot of people, probably unstable people, for being honest, are going to start returning fire against federal agents. In which case, all hell is going to break loose, because when you start and of course, if the obvious needs to be stated, I don't think anyone should do that. I support ICE in principle. I support the principle of mass deportations, but I will go on record and saying, and we're late enough in the recording for me to say this, that the way things have been carried out have been absolutely retarded. But
Yeah, I
that,
totally agree.
but that all being said, like, we're going to reach a boiling point where a lot of these people who think they're these Antifa revolutionaries are probably going to start returning fire, and I do not want to see what happens when that starts. When you start to get these weird revolutionary LARPer groups thinking they're going to take on the new Gestapo or whatever stupid delusional fantasies have been fed to them by the media for who knows how long. And I think much like the Thomas Crook case, much like the case of that guy with the LGBTQ boyfriend who took out Charlie Kirk, assuming he was the guy who actually carried out the action, which I'm not going to get into that debate right now. But you're going to get this younger generation who cannot remember time before Trump, who have been fed these narratives from the time they can remember, and they're probably going to take some pretty drastic actions, and we're all going to have to bear the consequences of that.
Yeah, I mean, it remains to be seen, but Trump is, like I say, willing to escalate.
And to the destruction of his own legacy, because instead of choosing actual populist winning methods of deportation, like screwing over these guys who run these giant industrial farms or these warehouses or whatever, he wants to thumb his nose at Tim Walz in Minnesota over 2020, and in which case he's going to burn all his political capital there. If this keeps up, especially at the rate it's going, if we keep getting confrontation,
Yeah, wait till the midterms.
Yeah, the midterms are going to be atrocious, in which case they probably will impeach him. I doubt they'll remove him from office, but he's going to have a third impeachment on his record. And the last 2 years of his term are going to be gridlocked. And any dream he had of a third term, assuming it was even possible, are going to just be dead on those grounds.
Yeah.
And who's going to be left to pick up the pieces? The actual supporters of right-wing ideas, the actual supporters of demographic integrity of this nation, not only this nation, but pretty much every European majority nation in the world. The people who actually support any degree of social conservatism, who are against LGBTQ, or name any of these degenerate issues that you can. And like I said, it's going to be people like you and me who are going to have to pick up the pieces, and who are probably going to bear the consequences of President Gavin Newsom when he decides he's going to have his crackdowns.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I have a friend of mine who's habitually on Instagram and all the others, and constantly sends me stuff. He's been keeping track of the narrative, and I mean, they are going to be very ready for Newsom. I did see a poll about how basically the non-white vote has already decided that they're done with Trump. Remember, that was all the rage.
Oh yeah, and he built a great amount of goodwill with a number of Hispanics across the Southwest.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll put up this graphic that you have.
Time Siena poll, yeah, those.
But yeah, that was supposed to be like the Republican Party's new thing, like the multiracial working class vote, blah blah blah. Well, I mean, that's dead, and of course they're not going to go the direction of saying like of being the quote unquote white party. No, nobody's going to touch that one with a 10-foot pole. And what are they going to go back to being the Chamber of Commerce party, or they're going to rely on Zionist donations to try to carry them across the finish line? Which is probably going to be number 3 if we're being honest. I mean, yeah. What else would it be? And yeah, that, as we said all the way back in 2024, Trump was put in there to bear the consequences of the unpopular decisions of the regime, and it will be his legacy that is tarnished, and it'll be right-wingers of every stripe left to bear the consequences and pick up the pieces while Trump gets to go into his retirement in Mar-a-Lago and never think about any of us again.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
But that's all I had for this week.
And so that's all I have myself as well.
So thank you everyone for tuning in to this episode of the War Report. Like I said, I'm going to be out for a couple weeks. I might, depending on how things go, post like brief updates while I'm on vacation. I'm not making any promises. But as far as like formalized shows are going, there's going to be a 7-hour time difference. So that's just simply not going to happen. But you'll hear from me in February, hopefully shortly after I get back. But we'll make those arrangements when the time comes. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in, and goodbye.
Goodbye and take care.